Okay, I'm going to be demonstrating a grown bowl. A little bit of clay. This is the very, very first pot that most beginning students will throw. So a couple of things: you want to make sure that your bat is not warped, okay, and make sure that your bat doesn't slip from side to side. Ours, or this particular one, is, and so I'm going to use a little bit of paper towel and water to soften it. And what I want to do is just fill the little bit of gap that there is in these holes. I don't want any paper touching the metal wheel head, just on the side of the pins. If you have paper on the metal wheel head, the bat's going to bounce around like this, which will make throwing more challenging, more difficult than it needs to be. All right? So with plastic bats, you want to make sure there's no water on the surface before you put the clay on. If you're using a masonite bat, you want to make sure you dampen the surface of the masonite just a bit before you apply the clay. If it's glistening, then the clay isn't going to adhere very well. But anyway, with plastic bats, do not have it damp at all. With your clay, place it in the center. You can push it around if it's pretty far off. Okay, what you'll find is that as I throw, the wheel will be going faster at the earlier stages of the throwing process, and the wheel, I'll need to slowly have it slow down in the latter parts of throwing. The pot is much more fragile. Something else that you'll notice is that I have my elbows against my thighs as much as possible, or in here, but somewhere against my body. My hands are touching or locked in some fashion as much as possible, and that adds stability in this tripod. Okay. Water is your lubricant. It reduces the drag on the clay, so make sure that you keep your hands nice and wet and the clay surface nice and glistening. You don't want to use so much water that water's flying off onto the splash pan. Most of my students don't use enough water. Some students use too much, and you'll have a lot of water and slip built up in here, and it'll start to overflow. So you want to keep an eye on the water level in the splash pan. Alright, so water, and I'm just applying pressure from the top. Once I think the clay is stuck, I can work on the side as well. So right-handers, you want the wheel spinning counterclockwise. Most of your work will be done on the right side. This part of the centering is the only exception to it. Left-handers, you want the wheel going the other direction, and you'll work on the opposite side that I'm showing. So one advantage to working on this side for centering is that the clay is moving in this direction and hitting my palm, and I'm able to brace my arm, my elbow with my leg, and I can get the strength of my leg to go in on the centering, so I have more strength and more control. Sounds like the bat still is a little loose. So now I'm going to cone the clay up. If you get a little recessed area like this, make sure you take care of it before it goes too deep. So I'm going to push at an angle like that to get rid of it. All right? So get rid of it and then continue up. And doing this helps to warm up the clay, aligns the clay particles so that they perform better. do this a couple of times, and make sure you don't angle your hands like this, otherwise you'll tear the top part of the clay off. Pretend like there's the Eiffel Tower in your hands and you're just guiding your hands over the surface. Okay? So when I push this down, make sure that the other hand isn't down here. You want that up here. The reason being is that as it pushes down, if there's going to be unevenness, it's going to be on the side here. So that's where that other hand used to be. Always gradually take your hands off, gradually take your hands off. Sudden movements will throw the clay off. Okay, and check to see if the clay is centered by taking your finger and start at the bottom. If my finger is bouncing from side to side, then it means at that level the clay is still off. I'm going to check a little bit higher. Okay, so I'm moving up in increments. And on top, if my finger bounces up and down, that means that that diameter, the clay is off. All right? And so, for me, usually it's the side that's going to be off, if it's off at all, if the clay is off at all. Okay, so what I'm going to do is apply pressure on top and the side, and a little bit more pressure in the problem area. All right, and it's important to be touching from here all the way across to here minimally. The wheel's rotating, so by touching all of that, you're touching the full mound of clay. Think of the unevenness in the clay as the air in a long balloon. If you squeeze one end, the air is going to move to the other side. So that's why you need to basically trap the entire surface of the clay to get it centered properly. All right, so now I'm going to set the depth of the floor. You may find some potters use their thumbs like this. The hands are independent of each other. Some will go like this or like this. I go like that. Beginners, I recommend that you have your hands touching in some fashion while you perform this task, and you'll have a lot more stability. Bad at judging depth, so how I deal with that is I coat the tool, the mule tool, with slip, and I poke the very center until it hits the bat, and then I can see where the slip has been displaced, so I can see how thick the floor is. It's a little thick. I'll go a little thinner. You want to make sure you leave the floor thick enough so that you have clay left to be able to trim away. So if you look at your bowls at home, you'll find that the underside there's a little foot ring where the bowl sits on the table. The rest of the pot is raised up and there's glaze and also glazed. So you're going to need to trim some clay away there. So you need to make sure that the floor is left thick enough so that you can trim some of that clay away so you can glaze the underside and still have a floor intact. So probably minimum would be 3/8 inch thick. So now I'm going to bring my hands towards me, trying to open up a flat floor. Now, as you do this, if you notice a recessed area in the center, it means that you've been raising your hands up as you've been opening the floor. If you notice a bump in the center, then it means that you've been pushing down as you've been opening up the floor. Okay, so now I'm going to compress the floor. Okay, and compressing the floor will help reduce the chances of cracks in the floor and the drying in the bisque firing and the glaze firing. So to do this, I gradually move to the center, gradually move out with light pressure. You want these rings that you're creating to overlap. Okay. And then I'm going to continue out further. So this is my transition area from the floor to the wall. And the thicker the floor is, the more time you're going to need to spend with compressing the floor. Water. Now you'll notice that there's a stagger that happens with my hands. The hand on the inside is going to be higher than the outside hand when I'm down below the floor. That's natural. When I first do my pulls, what you want is the inside hand maintains the diameter of the floor, so it needs to stay firmly planted in terms of radius. And the outside hand is doing the pushing, is doing the work. And as you come up, what you want is the hands to be almost directly across from each other. The outside hand I always have slightly staggered, a little bit lower. Okay. Also, I'm using my hands as pinchers, and that minimizes the amount of my hand that's touching the clay, that's putting stress, torque, friction on the clay. So it's just where my fingers are directly across from each other is where there's pinching happening. Doing this, which I see so many students do, the only place that's actually doing any work is where these fingertips are and the small area that is across from these fingers. Okay, so that's a lot of wasted stress you're putting on the clay. Something to be very conscious of. The bottom inch and a half, you need to leave on the thick side because that area of the pot, it's closer to being horizontal, and so it's more apt to collapse due to the forces of gravity. So you need that clay for support. Once your clay is leather hard, it's stiffer and it won't need that extra clay. So that's when it's trimmed away. I like leaving a little bit of thickness on the rim of my pot, because that's a vulnerable area that can get chipped more easily through use. Notice that the wall is relatively steep, and that's fine even if you're wanting to make a bowl that's going to be quite shallow. Throw the wall steep, and then you can shape it once you're done with all your bowls. Okay? So you can use a rib, or you can just use your fingers for shaping. It depends on the type of surface that you're after. So with the poles, the work is coming from the fingers on the outside. Now with shaping, the outside hand is the brace or support, and the interior, your inside hand is doing the work. So it was going slower than it was before. Steadily slowing down. Final things like, say laying the rim down like this. You want to do it at the very end. It is stressful to the pot, and that area is more susceptible to gravity, and so have it be one of the very last things that you do. And you can use a little piece of chamois or wet piece of chamois, or this is a little piece of the real thin plastic that you get from the dry cleaners bags that your clothing will come in. And I'm just wrapping the rim with that. and it really refines the lip. Oops. All right. All the water from the inside, well, water and slip's been removed from in here. I'm going to get rid of all the water and slip from the bat. Okay. So there's a little bit of slip on the edge here that I'll just scrape away. And it's important to get rid of all the slip and water off of the bat before you draw the wire through. And that's because when you draw the wire through, the slip and water could wick underneath the pot, causing the pot to reseal to the bat, which would be a problem. So pull the wire taut this way. Hard flat against the bat as you draw it through. You can have the wheel stay still or turn if you want. Make sure you're all the way through to the other side before you lift up. Okay, and this, I'm going to slice it in half so you can see what the inside looks like. Okay, so you see there's ample thickness down here for the floor, and also about an inch and a half way up, and that's ideal.